I thought I understood solitude. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 28, ex-military, and broken in ways most people wouldn't understand. I didn't leave the service because I was afraid. Far from it. I left because I couldn't stop seeing faces that weren't there, hearing cries when everything around me was silent. My nights were nightmares, my days a blur. Montana's wilderness promised something I hadn't felt in years: quiet, isolation, a chance to be just a man, not a soldier. The journey here nearly broke me before it even began. The drive north had been long, grueling, tires crunched over miles of gravel roads that twisted through dense forests like veins. My old truck rattled with every bump, the engine straining up the mountainside. I hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. My backpack was heavy with supplies, extra lamps, canned food, a rifle I hadn't touched in months. Every mile north made the world behind me fade, but left my body sore and my mind jittery. By the time I reached the clearing, dusk was already swallowing the horizon. The sun was a thin line of orange behind the mountains, and shadows stretched like dark fingers across the gravel. The tower stood there, silent and swaying in the evening breeze, its wooden beams gray and cracked with age. It looked both inviting and threatening. It was my sanctuary and my prison. I slammed the truck door, ears ringing from the silence that followed. The forest greeted me like a living thing, pine needles rustling, distant birds calling, the faint trickle of a creek far below. I grabbed my pack, hoisted it onto my back, and started the climb toward the tower. Each step on the gravel road felt heavier than the last. My legs burned, my lungs ached. I could feel the altitude pulling at me, making every breath shallow and hard. My body wanted to give in, to collapse onto the hard earth, but something, pride, stubbornness, whatever kept me alive in the army, made me keep moving. I reached the base of the tower just as the sun vanished completely. The forest plunged into twilight. I paused, breathing heavily, staring up at the wooden structure. The stairs looked fragile, but serviceable, and the small cabin at its base seemed almost welcoming. I set down my pack and rubbed my face with my hands, feeling dirt and sweat streak across my skin. I was exhausted in a way I hadn't felt since the field. Before climbing, I needed to check the gear. Lamps, fuel, rifle, radio, everything was in place. I ran my hands over the cold wood of the tower, listening to the creaks that accompanied every shift of the beams. The smell of old pine and dust filled my nostrils, grounding me somehow. As I began to unpack inside the cabin, I noticed the first peculiar thing. A shadow moved across the far corner of the clearing, too tall and too thin to be human, bending oddly as it passed between two trees. I froze, squinting, but when I looked again it was gone. I muttered to myself, trying to convince my heart to stop racing. Deer, wind, something normal. Nothing more, I whispered. But the unease stayed. By the time I had settled into the cabin, night had fully fallen. The forest was alive with sounds, until it wasn't. Somewhere below, the creek's gurgle faded. The rustling of leaves slowed. Even the wind seemed to stop. I climbed the tower stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The forest stretched endlessly, black and thick, treetops swaying slightly in the night breeze. The air was sharp and cold, cutting into my lungs with every breath. I exhaled and watched the condensation curl like smoke into the darkness. I set up the lamps, trying to make the place feel less like a prison and more like home. The higher I climbed, the quieter the forest became. The silence pressed against my ears, almost deafening. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of a leaf, made me jump. I checked the rifle again, feeling its weight in my hands, a small comfort against the unknown. That's when I found the logbook, half buried under other books on a shelf, its cover cracked and dusty. It seemed ordinary at first. Pages were filled with mundane notes, wildlife sightings, weather patterns, and occasional fire reports from previous rangers. But the last few pages were different. The handwriting was frantic, jagged, pressed deep into the paper as if whoever wrote it had carved the words into the pages with their fear. 7 rules, each tied to a precise time of night. Survival rules. 1:30 a.m. Every lamp must be lit. Darkness before then invites it in early. 2 a.m. Lock all windows and doors. One left open at 2:01 and it's inside. 2:45 a.m. Do not look outside. No matter what you hear, it will sound familiar. 3:13 a.m. The forest will fall silent. Do not move. Do not breathe too loudly. 3:33 a.m. Watch the tree line once. 2 eyes, stay still. 1, hide. None, it is entered. 3:40 a.m. Trapdoor rattles. Do not answer. Do not touch. It waits. 4 a.m. You may use the rifle. Do not miss. Fail, and dawn never comes. I stared at the rules, heart hammering. A laugh escaped me, nervous and hollow. Old Ranger's getting paranoid, I muttered. Nothing in these woods can hurt me, but even as I said it, I could feel something in the shadows, something patient and waiting, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The night settled fully and I climbed the tower once more to ensure the lamps were lit. My body ached, my legs burned, and my hands shook as I adjusted the wick. The forest seemed to lean closer, the shadows stretching longer and darker than they had any right to. A faint snap echoed from below. My pulse jumped, another snap, and then a whisper carried by the wind, so soft I almost didn't hear it, Daniel. I spun around, rifle in hand, but the clearing was empty. Only black silhouettes of pines remained. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. I climbed higher, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing. I forced myself to calm down. I wasn't going insane. Not yet. I followed the rules carefully, lit every lamp, locked every window, triple-checked the doors. And yet the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Something moved in the forest. Something waited. That night, sleep barely touched me. Every creak of the tower, every rustle outside made me startle. My dreams were filled with whispers and impossible footsteps. The forest was alive in ways that made no sense. I woke before dawn, shivering, soaked in sweat, convinced I had heard movement beneath the tower. The birds sang, the creek gurgled, the wind whispered gently. I thought I had survived my first night. I was wrong. I never realized how much the mind can play tricks on you until the first night in the tower. By the time the sun disappeared completely, I was exhausted from the journey. Every muscle ached. My back screamed from the pack I'd hauled up the gravel roads. My legs felt like lead, and my fingers were raw from gripping the rifle, the lamp handles, and the rough wood of the tower stairs. I wanted nothing more than to collapse in the cot and pretend tomorrow would come safely, but the logbook's rules refused me that luxury. 1:30 a.m. I lit every lamp, shaking as my hands fumbled with the wicks. The small flames flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Every time a shadow stretched oddly, my pulse leapt. The forest outside seemed to lean closer, black trunks shifting like living things. I told myself it was my imagination. After all, I had survived worse. Right? Wrong. I double-checked the windows and doors. Locked. Secured. Everything seemed fine. I tried to sit on the cot, but sleep was already a stranger. The wind rustled the pines, but not as usual. The sound carried a weight, a deliberate quietude that pressed against my ears. It wasn't natural. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump. 2 a.m. Time had become a predator. I checked the windows again. My fingers traced the locks, ensuring every one was secure. That's when I heard it, the faintest knock from inside the walls, soft but distinct. One knock, pause, then another. My heart seized in my chest. I froze. My own voice whispered, "It's nothing. It's nothing." I told myself it was rats settling in the wood, but the knocks didn't sound like rats. They were deliberate, patient, testing me. I gripped the rifle tighter, scanning the tree line through the tower's small window. Nothing, only the black expanse of pines. I tried to calm my racing mind. My breaths came shallow and fast. Just follow the rules. Just follow the rules, I muttered, repeating it like a mantra. That was all I could do. Obedience, repetition, staying alive. 2:45 a.m. I heard it then. A voice carried on the wind. My mother's voice, soft, familiar, calling my name. Daniel, come to me. I dropped the rifle. My chest tightened, my stomach lurched. Panic clawed at me, but the logbook's words echoed in my head. Do not look outside. No matter what you hear, it will sound familiar. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes wide. Every instinct screamed to look, to run, to answer. But I obeyed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loudly. The forest seemed to wait, listening, judging, testing me. Minutes felt like hours. The voice swirled around the tower, soft at first, then rising in pitch, angrier, sharper. Daniel, Daniel. It was everywhere and nowhere. Then it stopped. Silence returned, unnatural and suffocating. 3:13 a.m. The forest fell completely silent. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of nothing, like the world itself was holding its breath. My pulse roared in my ears. My hands shook. My mind strained to catch the faintest movement outside, but there was none. The air seemed heavier. Each breath burned my lungs. I wanted to scream, to move, but the rule repeated itself in my mind. Do not move. Do not breathe too loudly. Obedience was my only defense. I clutched the rifle, trembling. Then in the blackness beyond the tree line, I saw it. 2 faint points of light, glowing and unblinking like eyes watching me. I froze, body locked in place. 2 eyes. The rule said to stay still. I did, but then one blinked out. Only a single eye remained, staring. My stomach dropped, panic surged, but the rule warned, if you see one, hide. If you see none, it is entered. I ducked behind the cabin support beams, heart hammering, praying my own movements didn't give me away. 3:40 a.m. The trapdoor rattled, hard, violent, scraping. Something underneath was moving, trying to escape, or trying to lure me closer. My mind raced. I wanted to open it, to confront it, but the logbook's warning screamed at me, do not answer, do not touch, it waits. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, hoping the darkness outside and the floor beneath me wouldn't betray me. The sound was all around me, claws dragging, wood groaning, the soft hiss of something breathing. I could feel it beneath me, in the floor, in the walls. Patient, waiting. 4 a.m. Time felt like a knife in my chest. The rule said I could finally use the rifle. Finally. But I wasn't ready. My hands shook violently. The creature, or whatever it was, hadn't shown itself fully yet. Only glimpses, shadows, eyes, whispers. I trained the rifle on the tree line, fingers tight around the trigger. The forest remained still. The eye vanished. Silence returned. My pulse thundered. My exhaustion gnawed at me. My body screamed for sleep, for rest, for mercy. But there was no mercy here, only survival. I slumped against the wall, holding the rifle close, trying to keep my mind from unraveling. I didn't sleep. Not really. I listened. Every creak, every distant snap, every breath of wind was a potential threat. The forest was alive in ways I had never imagined. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the treetops, my body was trembling, numb from fatigue. I'd survived my first night, but I wasn't whole. Something had watched me, tested me, and I could feel it still. Waiting, patient, hungry, and somewhere deep inside me I knew this was only the beginning. Night 2. I thought surviving the first night was a victory, a fragile, hollow victory. By the time night fell again, my body ached in ways I hadn't imagined. Muscles I didn't even know existed screamed at me with every step. My hands, raw from gripping the rifle and the rough wood of the tower, were still shaky. I'd eaten little, slept less, and every shadow in the tower now felt like it carried malice. I tried to shake it off. It was just the first night, just your imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The forest didn't forget. It didn't forgive. 1:30 a.m. I lit the lamps with trembling hands, every flame flickering like a heartbeat. The logbook's first rule was clear. By 1:30 a.m., every lamp must be lit. Darkness before then invites it in early. I obeyed meticulously, triple-checking each wick. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, branches stretching in impossible angles. Shadows elongated unnaturally, writhing across the clearing like living things. My heart thundered. Something in the tree line moved, but whenever I turned my head fully, it vanished. I tried to calm myself. This is just nerves. But the deeper I stared into the dark, the more I felt eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the blackness beyond the pines. 2 a.m. I checked the windows and doors again, methodically, as the logbook warned. Lock all windows and doors. One left open at 2:01 and it's inside. Then I heard it, a knock. Sharp, hollow, repeated. Not from the outside, from inside. I froze, breath catching in my chest. My own voice hissed in my mind. It's nothing. Just the wind, just the wood. But I knew better. It was deliberate. Patient, waiting. I gripped the rifle tighter. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I didn't. Obedience was my only defense. 2:45 a.m. By now, exhaustion was gnawing at me like a predator. My eyelids drooped despite the terror. Then the voice came. My mother's voice, soft, familiar, calling my name, Daniel, come to me. I dropped the rifle instinctively. My stomach twisted. Panic surged. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to answer, to escape. But the logbook warned, do not look outside. No matter what you hear, it will sound familiar. I pressed myself into the corner, ears straining. The voice swirled around the tower, rising in urgency, then fading, then repeating. It was everywhere at once, yet nowhere. My pulse hammered in my throat. 3:13 a.m. The forest died. Not the kind of quiet you expect at night. Not even the kind of quiet before a storm. This was absolute. Every leaf, every branch, every creature ceased to exist, or at least it seemed that way. I clutched the rifle like a lifeline, holding my breath. My own heartbeat roared in my ears. The logbook's rule echoed, do not move, do not breathe too loudly. The silence is not absence, it is attention. I couldn't help it. I shivered. I was aware of every millisecond, every twitch of a shadow, every faint shift in the pines. Then I saw them. Eyes, 2 points of light, faint but unmistakable, staring at me from the tree line. The rule was clear, 2 eyes, stay still. I froze. And then one disappeared. A single glowing eye remained, unblinking. My stomach knotted. 1, hide, the rule warned. I crouched lower, heart hammering. The air grew thick, pressing against me, suffocating. 3:40 mm. Then came the trapdoor, the one in the floorboards of the cabin below the tower. Rattle, scratch, thump, harder, louder, insistent. Something moved beneath me, something alive, patient, and impossibly strong. My mind screamed to open it, to confront it, but the rule warned, do not answer it, do not touch it. It waits. I pressed myself into a corner, trying not to breathe too loudly. The sound seemed to grow, like claws scraping, wood bending, breathing echoing in the hollow space beneath. It was my voice. It was not my voice. It whispered my name, coaxing, demanding, pleading. Daniel, let me out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I stayed still. Obedience was my only chance. 4 a.m. Finally, the rule allowed me to act. You may finally use the rifle. Do not miss. Fail and dawn will never come. I raised it slowly, hand shaking violently. The tree line was black, impenetrable. Nothing moved. My finger hovered over the trigger. Minutes felt like hours. My muscles screamed. My lungs burned. My mind was fraying. And then, a shadow moved, closer, faster. I fired instinctively. The bullet tore through air and wood and something else, I couldn't tell what. The shadow recoiled but did not fall. It didn't scream. It simply waited. 4:30 a.m. I slumped against the wall, body trembling, soaked in sweat. Every nerve screamed. My exhaustion made my thoughts muddled, but my fear was sharp and clear. The forest had learned me. Every creak of the tower, every snap of a branch, every whisper of wind was a test. By now I barely noticed the cold. My stomach ached with hunger, my muscles burned with fatigue. My eyes felt like they were made of sand, but sleep was impossible. The forest would not allow it. Even as the first hints of dawn brushed the treetops, I knew the terror was far from over. Something had tested me tonight, and it had found my weaknesses, and I had survived, but only barely. The real night was only beginning. By the third night, I was already fraying at the edges. My body ached as though I had spent years running instead of days climbing the tower. Every muscle was sore, my hands raw and blistered, and my joints screamed with every movement. Hunger clawed at me, gnawing through the fog of exhaustion. My eyes burned from lack of proper sleep, yet I couldn't close them. The forest wouldn't allow it. The first night had been a warning. The second night had been a test. This night was the strike. 1:30 a.m., the lamps must burn. I lit every lamp as the logbook demanded. My fingers trembled violently. The rule wasn't just instruction, it was a lifeline. Darkness before the hour could mean an early encounter with whatever waited in the trees. Shadows wriggled across the cabin walls, stretching and curling unnaturally. The forest seemed alive, breathing around me, leaning toward the tower. My skin crawled at every whisper of wind, every faint crack of wood. I felt eyes piercing me from every direction, though nothing moved. I forced my mind to obey, steady hands, controlled breaths. Survival depended on it. 2 a.m., doors, and the first knock. I checked all windows and doors again, locked, secured, triple-checked. Then the knocking started, louder and more urgent than before. Sharp, hollow, intelligent, not from the outside, inside the walls. I gripped the rifle, forcing my body to obey. I could feel my heart hammering, yet I remained still. Obedience was the only thing keeping me alive. My mind screamed to flee, to open a door, to confront it, but the rule was clear. One wrong move and it could enter. 2:45 a.m. Familiar voices become menacing. Fatigue had my body shaking, my thoughts fuzzy, and then the voices started. Not just familiar, but mocking. My mother, my father, friends I had lost in the military. They called my name. "Daniel, come to us." The voices circled the tower, rising and falling. The logbook warned, "Do not look outside." I pressed my back against the wall, listening as the whispers became angry, frustrated, almost enraged. My pulse thundered. Obedience was my only defense. I wanted to scream, to respond, to throw myself into the night, but obeying the rules was the only thing keeping me alive. 3:13 a.m. Silence. Absolute. Then the forest went silent. Not quiet, not peace. Deathly, suffocating silence that pressed against my chest and stole my breath. Every creak of the tower, every snap of a branch felt like a hammer striking my skull. I clutched the rifle like a lifeline. The forest was not absent. It was observing, calculating. The rule repeated itself in my mind. Do not move. Do not breathe too loudly. My body obeyed, but my mind screamed. Then I saw them. Eyes. 2 pale points in the tree line, unblinking. I froze. One disappeared. The remaining single eye glimmered, unrelenting. Hide. Obey. I crouched, chest heaving, breath shallow. 3:40 a.m. Trapdoor escalation. The trapdoor rattled violently beneath the cabin. Claws scraped, thumped, dug into the wood. Something alive, intelligent, and patient moved below me. I wanted to confront it, to open the door, to demand reality. But the logbook warned, do not answer. Do not touch. It waits. Whispers rose from below. Familiar voices warped into twisted imitations of friends and family. Daniel, come down. Let me out. The air grew thick, oppressive, suffocating. My skin crawled. Obedience was survival. 4 a.m. The rifle's judgment. At last I could use the rifle. I raised it, shaking violently, aiming at shadows beyond the tree line. A glimmer of movement. I fired. The bullet tore through the darkness, through branches, and struck something. It recoiled but did not fall. No scream, no collapse. Just watching, waiting. I sank to the floor, shaking violently, drenched in sweat, muscles quivering from fear and exhaustion. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper was an attack on my mind. The forest had learned me. It knew my habits, my weaknesses, my fears. 4:30 a.m., the forest came. The night stretched endlessly. Hunger clawed at my stomach. Exhaustion clawed at my muscles. Yet the forest pressed in, patient, intelligent, and deliberate. I realized then that surviving wasn't about fighting. It was about obeying, obedience, repetition, fear. And somewhere deep in the shadows, I could feel it watching, learning, waiting for the moment I slipped. By the time the first pale light of dawn brushed the treetops, I was numb. I had survived, but the forest had left its mark. I was weaker, scarred, and more aware than ever that these nights would only grow worse. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I knew I would have to face it. Night 4. By the fourth night, the exhaustion had become a living thing. My body ached as though I'd spent years climbing, running, hiding. Every joint throbbed, my hands were blistered and trembling, my muscles screamed with every movement. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, yet I had no appetite. Fear suppressed even basic survival instincts. The forest was no longer just a silent observer. It had learned me. It had adapted. It knew my habits, my weaknesses, my fears, and it was beginning to hunt me with purpose. It's 1:30 a.m. I lit every lamp, hands shaking violently. I repeated the mantra in my mind, all lamps must burn, or darkness comes early. The logbook had warned me, but it was more than warning now. It was lifeline. The shadows inside the tower twisted unnaturally. Branches scratched against the cabin like long fingers, and a wind that wasn't wind whispered through the pines. I could feel eyes on me. Not one pair, but hundreds, shifting in the dark. They waited, patient, calculating. I gripped the rifle tighter, forcing myself to obey. My heart raced. The slightest misstep could be fatal. 2 a.m., knocks grew louder. I checked every window and door. Locked, secured, triple-checked. Then the knocks came, louder, sharper, more deliberate than ever. They weren't random. They had intelligence, purpose. Something wanted in, or wanted me to think it did. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the rifle, muscles taut. I had obeyed the rules for 3 nights now. I had to survive by them. One mistake, and it would be inside. 2:45 a.m. Exhaustion made my eyelids droop, my body heavy. Then the voices came. Familiar voices, but this time they were cruel, mocking. My mother, my father, friends I had lost. They called my name, taunting me. "Daniel, come down, come with us." The logbook warned, "Do not look outside. No matter what you hear, it will sound familiar." I pressed myself into a corner, listening as the voices twisted, rising and falling, angry, frustrated, impatient. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, but obedience was survival. 3:13 a.m., absolute silence. The forest fell completely silent. Not quiet, deadly. Every leaf, every branch, every creature ceased to exist, or pretended to. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. 2 eyes appeared in the darkness beyond the tree line. I froze. One disappeared. A single eye glimmered, unblinking. The rule was clear: if you see one, hide. I crouched, holding my breath, body taut with terror. But this time, it felt different. Closer, watching, judging, calculating. 3:40 a.m., trapdoor became a threat. It rattled violently beneath the cabin. Claws scraped, thumped, dug into the wood. Something alive, deliberate, moved below. I wanted to open it, to confront it, to see what was real. But the logbook's warning screamed, "Do not answer. Do not touch. It waits." The whispers rose from below. Familiar voices, twisted and mocking. "Daniel, open. Come to us." My skin crawled. The air was thick and oppressive. Obedience was survival. It was 4 a.m. Finally, the logbook allowed me to act. I raised the rifle, hands shaking violently, aiming at the darkness beyond the tree line. Shadows flickered, moving with purpose. I fired. The bullet tore through branches and air and something else. The shadow recoiled but did not fall. It did not scream. It simply waited, patient and intelligent. I sank to the floor, drenched in sweat, trembling violently. Every sound, every movement, Every whisper was a test. The forest had learned me. It had adapted. It had a patience beyond human comprehension. 4:30 a.m. By now, the night had stretched into a nightmare of sound and silence. Hunger clawed at my stomach. Exhaustion consumed my muscles, yet the forest pressed in, intelligent, deliberate, oppressive. As I sat against the wall, catching my breath, I noticed something in the corner of my vision, a scrap of paper I hadn't seen before, tucked under a floorboard. I reached for it with trembling hands, words scrawled faintly, almost invisible. Rule 8, when the forest becomes your shadow, follow no rule you know. Only the forest knows the way. I froze. My pulse spiked. The logbook hadn't mentioned this. No one had warned me. The forest waited, watching, smiling in ways I couldn't comprehend. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the treetops, I realized something terrifying. I had survived the night, but the forest was evolving faster than I could. The hidden rule was there, a puzzle, a threat. Something far worse than what I had faced before was coming. By the 5th night, my body had become a battlefield. Every muscle burned with exertion and fatigue. Every joint ached as though the forest itself were pressing down on me. My hands were blistered from gripping the rifle, the lamp handles, and the rough wood of the tower stairs. Hunger gnawed relentlessly at my stomach, yet I had no appetite. Fear had replaced every other sensation. Sleep was a distant memory, a phantom from another life. The forest was no longer merely a threat. It had become a predator, patient and intelligent, shaping itself around my weaknesses. It was learning me. I could feel it in every shadow, every whispered wind, every shift of branches outside the tower. And tonight, I could feel it preparing to strike. 1:30 a.m. I lit every lamp as the logbook demanded, my hands trembling so violently it took minutes to steady each flame. The words repeated in my mind, all lamps must burn or darkness comes early. Shadows inside the tower twisted unnaturally, writhing and stretching like living, clawed fingers. Outside, the pines seemed to bend toward the tower, as if leaning in to watch me. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my boots sounded amplified, deliberate, a message from the forest itself. I gripped the rifle like a lifeline, forcing myself to obey. I knew instinctively that fear alone was not enough to survive. Obedience was survival. 2 a.m., the knocks become violent. I checked every window and door, triple-checking locks, ensuring that nothing could slip past. Then the knocks began. Not gentle taps, not testing, violent, sharp, relentless pounding that shook the walls and made the floorboards vibrate under my boots. This was not random. It had purpose, intelligence. I pressed myself against the corner, muscles taut, heart hammering. My instincts screamed to flee, to confront, to open the door, but I remembered the rules. Obedience was survival. One mistake and it could be inside, and I would be finished. 2:45 a.m., voices distorted and malicious. The familiar voices returned, but now they were twisted. My mother, my father, and old friends I had lost called my name, but warped, mocking, cruel. "Daniel, come, follow." My hands trembled. My body ached. My lungs burned from holding my breath. The logbook's warning rang in my head. Do not look outside. No matter what you hear, it will sound familiar. The voices circled the tower, rising and falling, angry, frustrated, impatient. I wanted to scream. I wanted to respond. I wanted to fling myself into the night. But I obeyed. Every second I obeyed, I survived. Every second I faltered, I risked death. 3:13 a.m. Suddenly, the forest fell silent, deadly, suffocating silence. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The shadows of the pines seemed to pause, stretching unnaturally, watching me. 2 eyes appeared in the darkness beyond the tree line. I froze. One disappeared. A single eye glimmered, unblinking. Hide. Obey. My chest heaved, my breath shallow. The forest was no longer passive. It was probing, testing, evaluating me. Then I felt it, something moving closer. shadows that didn't belong to trees, shadows that clung to the cabin like tendrils, creeping along walls and floorboards. I swallowed hard, clinging to the rulebook like it was my lifeline. 3:40 a.m. The trapdoor rattled violently beneath the cabin. Claws scraped, thumped, dug into the wood. Something alive, deliberate, and intelligent was moving below. I wanted to open it, confront it, prove what was real, but the rule screamed in my head. Do not answer. Do not touch. It waits. Whispers rose from below. Familiar voices warped into something monstrous. Daniel, let us out. Join us. The air grew thick and suffocating. My skin crawled, my nails dug into the floorboards, and my teeth clenched until they ached. Obedience was survival. 4 a.m. Finally, the logbook allowed me to act. I raised the rifle, shaking, violently aiming at the tree line. Shadows moved with purpose, twisting unnaturally, almost sentient. I fired. The bullet tore through air, branches, and something else. The shadow recoiled but did not fall. It did not scream. It waited, patient, intelligent, malicious. I sank to the floor, drenched in sweat, trembling violently. Every sound, every movement, every whisper was a test. The forest had adapted. It knew me. It had learned my rhythms, my weaknesses. It waited for the moment I faltered. It's 4:30 a.m. Exhausted, shaking, and half delirious, I noticed a scrap of paper tucked beneath a loose floorboard, the hidden 8th rule. The faint scrawl read, Rule 8, when the forest becomes your shadow, follow no rule you know. Only the forest knows the way. I froze. My pulse spiked. The meaning wasn't clear yet, but instinct screamed this rule was different, dangerous, perhaps the key to survival, or the final trap. Outside, shadows were beginning to take form. Eyes glinted, shapes moved, and the whispers grew louder. The creatures were no longer abstract threats. They were solidifying, reaching into the world I could touch, tangible and lethal. By the first light of dawn, I survived, but barely. My body was numb, my mind trembling, and a piece of my soul had been claimed by the forest. The hidden rule would demand action soon, or death would claim me first. By the 6th night, I was nothing but nerves and exhaustion. My body burned with fatigue. My muscles felt as though they were made of lead, yet every step, every motion, every heartbeat was a battle. My hands were raw from gripping the rifle and lamps. My joints screamed with every movement, and my stomach gnawed at me with relentless hunger. Sleep had become an impossible luxury. Fear replaced every other sensation. The forest had stopped being merely a threat. It had become an omnipresent predator, patient and intelligent. It had learned my habits, my weaknesses, my fears. And tonight, I knew it would strike with purpose. 1:30 a.m. I lit every lamp, hands trembling violently. Obedience was everything. The logbook's mantra echoed in my mind, all lamps must burn, or darkness comes early. Shadows inside the tower twisted unnaturally, stretching and writhing like living claws. Outside, the pines bent impossibly, reaching toward the tower. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deliberate, each whisper of wind a taunt. Eyes glimmered beyond the tree line, far more numerous than any night before. The forest had become aware of my every motion, every heartbeat, every shiver of fear. Obedience was survival, but now I realized it might not be enough. 2 a.m., I checked all doors and windows, locked, secured, triple-checked. Then the knocking came, louder, sharper, more insistent. The wall shook, my stomach twisted in terror. Something intelligent was outside, or within the cabin itself. I pressed myself against the wall, holding the rifle as though it were a lifeline. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight blindly. Obedience, the rules, were the only thing keeping me alive. 2:45 a.m., the voices returned, familiar voices but now warped, sinister and mocking. My mother, my father, friends I had lost, they called my name, distorted into something monstrous. Daniel, come, join us, forever. The logbook's warning rang in my head, do not look outside. No matter what you hear, it will sound familiar. I pressed myself into a corner, trembling. My chest heaved, my breath came in shallow, terrified bursts. The voices rose in anger and frustration, circling the tower like predators ready to strike. Obedience was survival, yet it felt like it might not be enough tonight. 3:13 a.m. The forest fell completely silent, deadly, suffocating. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Every shadow, every branch, every distant whisper felt magnified. The logbook's rule repeated in my mind: do not move, do not breathe too loudly. Two pale eyes appeared in the darkness beyond the tree line. I froze. One disappeared. A single eye glimmered, unblinking. Hide, obey. My chest heaved. Shadows shifted unnaturally, creeping along the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The forest was no longer just observing, it was entering my space, testing the limits of reality itself. 3:40 m.m. The trapdoor rattled violently. Claws scraped, thumped, and dug into the wood with deliberate force. Something alive, intelligent, and malevolent moved below. I wanted to confront it, to open the door, to see what was real, but the logbook's warning screamed, "Do not answer, do not touch, it waits." The whispers rose, more frantic, more insistent. Familiar voices twisted into something cruel. "Daniel, open, join us, we are your shadow." The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. I could feel it pressing against my chest, my lungs, my skin. Obedience was survival, yet the pressure of fear threatened to break me. 4 a.m. Finally, I was allowed to act. I raised the rifle, hands shaking violently, aiming at the tree line. Shadows moved with purpose, almost sentient, twisting unnaturally. I fired. The bullet tore through the night, through branches and through something solid. The shadow recoiled but did not fall. It did not scream. It waited, patient, intelligent, malicious. I sank to the floor, drenched in sweat, trembling violently. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper was a test. The forest had adapted, evolved. It had learned me. It waited for me to falter. 4:30 a.m. Exhaustion and terror consumed me. And then I remembered the hidden 8th rule, the scrap of paper I had found nights ago. Rule 8, when the forest becomes your shadow, follow no rule you know. Only the forest knows the way. The meaning wasn't clear, but instinct screamed that this was no ordinary instruction. This was a trap, a key, a lifeline, all at once. I realized I could no longer rely on the previous rules alone. Survival demanded something more, something I didn't yet understand. The shadows outside began to solidify, forming grotesque, twisted shapes that reached toward the tower. Eyes glinted with malicious intelligence. Whispers swirled around me, echoing, overlapping, mocking, and demanding obedience. But from what? From the rules I knew, or the rule I hadn't yet learned to follow? I forced myself to obey, but differently this time. I let instinct guide me. I didn't move toward the door, nor stay frozen. I did not act according to any rule I remembered fully. I followed the strange guidance of the forest itself, the whispers guiding my body in ways I didn't consciously control. By the time the first light of dawn touched the treetops, I had survived. But barely. My body ached beyond endurance. My mind was frayed, and yet I had learned something terrifying. The forest was no longer just a place. It was an entity, and it had a plan. The hidden 8th rule was not just a survival guide. It was a warning, a challenge, a test, and I had passed, for now. By the 7th night, I was no longer sure where I ended and the forest began. My body was battered, every muscle screaming with exhaustion. My hands were raw and trembling. My eyes burned from sleepless nights. Hunger gnawed at me relentlessly, but fear had replaced every other sensation. The forest was no longer a silent predator. It was deliberate, intelligent, and now fully active. Shadows moved with purpose. Branches struck the cabin walls like fists. The air itself seemed alive, whispering my name and twisting my thoughts. Tonight, I would either survive or become part of the forest. 1:30 a.m. I lit every lamp with shaking hands. Their flames flickered like the last heartbeat of a dying creature. Obedience was everything. The logbook's mantra echoed in my mind. All lamps must burn, or darkness comes early. Shadows inside the tower wriggled and stretched like living claws. Outside, the pines leaned unnaturally, stretching toward the tower. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching me. I forced myself to obey, holding my rifle as tightly as I could. Survival depended on it. 2mm. Every window and door was locked and secured, yet the knocking came with force beyond anything I had experienced. The cabin shuddered under it. Something intelligent, something deliberate, wanted in, or wanted me to believe it did. I pressed myself against the wall, muscles taut, heart hammering. Instincts screamed to flee, to confront, to open a door, but obedience was survival. I had no choice but to wait, listen, and endure. 2:45 a.m. The voices returned, more warped, cruel, and mocking than ever. My mother, father, and lost friends called my name, distorted and malicious. "Daniel, join us, forever." The logbook's warning echoed in my mind. Do not look outside. Do not trust what you hear. I pressed into a corner, trembling, breath shallow. The voices rose in fury, circling the tower. Obedience had kept me alive, but it was no longer enough. 3:13 a.m. Suddenly, the forest went silent, deadly silence. My heartbeat roared in my ears. 2 pale eyes appeared beyond the tree line. One vanished. The remaining eye glimmered, unblinking. Hide, obey. My chest heaved as shadows stretched unnaturally along walls and floorboards. The forest was no longer passive. It was entering my space, testing me, shaping reality itself. It was 3:40 a.m. The trapdoor rattled violently. Claws scraped, thumped, and dug into the wood. Something alive, deliberate, and malevolent moved below. I wanted to confront it, but the logbook's warning screamed, "Do not answer, do not touch, it waits." The whispers rose, urgent and insistent. "Daniel, let us out, join us, be one with us." The air thickened, heavy, suffocating. Obedience was survival, but my mind screamed, my body ached, and I realized that surviving this night would require more than following the old rules. 4 a.m., the creature emerged, and then I saw it fully. The shadows coalesced into a grotesque, solid form, a monstrous figure taller than any human, with limbs that bent impossibly, eyes glowing with intelligence and malice. It moved with a predatory grace, circling the tower like it owned the night. My rifle shook in my hands, useless against something that wasn't entirely physical. Bullets would not stop it. Obedience alone would not stop it. I realized then that the hidden 8th rule was no longer optional. It was the only chance I had. It's 4:30 a.m. I remember the scrap of paper beneath the floorboard. Rule 8, when the forest becomes your shadow, follow no rule you know. Only the forest knows the way. Instinct took over. I let go of everything I knew. I didn't obey the old rules. I didn't stay frozen. I didn't aim blindly with the rifle. I moved, guided by the whispers and instincts the forest seemed to lend me. The creature shrieked, a sound that shook my bones, and lunged. I darted, weaving through shadows and moonlight, following impulses I didn't consciously understand. The forest itself seemed to bend around me, revealing paths, hiding me, teaching me to survive. I fired only when instinct demanded, aimed only when the forest whispered, and somehow I survived. By the first light of dawn, I had made it. The cabin was damaged, the forest still pressing in, but I had endured. I was physically and mentally shattered, but I had glimpsed the truth. Survival was no longer about rules I could read. It was about surrendering to the forest's intelligence, trusting the hidden rule, and moving with instinct rather than logic. By the 8th night, my body was a fragile shell of exhaustion and fear. Every muscle burned, every joint ached, my hands were raw and trembling, and my stomach roared with hunger. Sleep had abandoned me long ago, leaving only terror as my companion. The forest no longer observed, it hunted. The shadows had taken form, solid, grotesque, and intelligent. Whispers filled the air, overlapping, mocking, guiding, and threatening. My previous nights of endurance had led to this, the ultimate test of survival. I lit every lamp, hands trembling violently, sweat stinging my eyes. Obedience to the old rules felt like a hollow ritual now. I repeated the mantra in my mind, all lamps must burn, or darkness comes early. Shadows twisted along the walls, but now they moved with awareness, stalking the light. Outside, The pines seemed to bend impossibly, leaning over the tower like claws. Eyes glimmered beyond the tree line, hundreds, perhaps thousands, fixed on me. I gripped the rifle, but instinct whispered that this night bullets would not be enough. I had to surrender to the forest itself. The knocking began, harder, more deliberate than ever. The cabin shook under the force. Something intelligent wanted in. I pressed against the wall, trembling. Every instinct screamed to run, to open a door, to confront it, but I knew the old rules alone could not save me. Survival demanded the hidden eighth rule. I had to follow instinct, guided by the forest itself. The familiar voices returned, warped and monstrous, calling my name with anger and hunger. "Daniel, come, join us. Your body, your mind, your soul." The old rules screamed in my head, but I ignored them. The hidden eighth rule guided me now: move, act, survive according to instincts that were not mine but lent by the forest. I pressed into the corner, then darted, following the impulses the forest whispered. Obedience now meant listening to the unseen intelligence, not the rules I had read. The forest moved. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls and floor, twisting into grotesque forms. Eyes glinted, limbs bent impossibly, and whispers turned into shrieks. The creatures were no longer abstract. They were tangible, moving toward me with lethal intent. I fired the rifle instinctively, but the bullets passed through the nearest shadow as if it were smoke. The creature shrieked, a sound that rattled my bones. I realized that survival required total trust in the hidden eighth rule, abandoning logic, fear, and even the old rules. The trapdoor burst open. Something clawed its way up, grotesque and massive, the smell of decay thick in the air. Whispers erupted around me. "Daniel, be one with us. Forever." My body screamed, every nerve on fire, every muscle aching. I moved not by thought, but by instinct. The hidden eighth rule guided my actions. I dodged, twisted, and used the environment as the forest instructed silently. Shadows merged and separated, forming new paths, hiding exits and revealing routes to survival. I followed without hesitation. By now I realized something terrifying and beautiful. The forest was no longer my enemy alone. It was my ally if I obeyed the hidden eighth rule. Shadows shifted around me, protecting, guiding, and warning. The creatures lunged, shrieked, and clawed, but I moved with an almost preternatural precision. The forest whispered, "Dodge, hide, survive." I obeyed without conscious thought, following paths invisible to the mind but clear to the body. The largest creature, a twisted amalgamation of shadows, eyes, and limbs, lunged directly at me. I had only one choice: surrender completely to the hidden eighth rule. I moved instinctively, letting the forest guide my actions. I dodged, weaved, and slipped past it, using shadows to hide and light to confuse it. The creature shrieked, clawing at nothing but air, as the forest itself seemed to bend reality around me. By the first light of dawn, the creature had retreated, the forest quieted, and I had survived. My body was battered, my mind frayed, but I had learned the ultimate truth. Survival depended on surrendering to the forest, trusting the hidden eighth rule, and moving with instinct, not logic. I was alive. I had endured. But the forest had claimed a piece of me. Something had changed forever. I was no longer merely Daniel. I was part of the forest, and it was part of me. The first rays of sunlight spilled over the treetops, casting long pale shadows across the tower and the forest floor. For the first time in 8 nights, I allowed myself to breathe. My body was a map of pain. Every muscle ached, my hands were blistered, and my mind trembled under the weight of exhaustion. But I had survived. Somehow I had survived. The forest, which had been an omnipresent predator, now seemed almost serene. Birds called tentatively in the distance, and the wind rustled gently through the pines. Yet beneath that calm, I could feel it. The forest was still alive, still watching. Part of it had claimed me, and I had claimed part of it. I sank to the floor of the tower, rifle resting loosely in my lap. The hidden eighth rule had been my salvation. Obedience alone had never been enough. Instinct, surrender, and trust in the forest had saved me. I thought back to the nights of terror, the knocks, the whispers, the shadows that moved like living creatures. the trapdoor that became a portal of horror. Each night had been a lesson in fear and obedience, and tonight the forest had finally tested the ultimate truth. Survival is not about controlling the darkness, it is about moving with it. I felt a strange bond forming with the place I had feared most. The forest had claimed a part of me, yes, but it had also given me something in return, a profound understanding of the thin line between life and death, fear and instinct. Even in daylight, I could sense the forest's presence. Shadows seemed deeper, the rustling of leaves more deliberate. The creatures had not vanished, they had merely receded, waiting. The hidden eighth rule had shown me the way, but it was not a permanent shield. The forest would return, and so would they, in ways I could not predict. I realized something terrifying. Survival had come at a cost. Part of me had changed. My instincts were sharper, my senses heightened, but my mind had been pushed to the edge of madness. The forest had taken pieces of my humanity, leaving behind a creature attuned to shadows, whispers, and instinct. I descended from the tower carefully, every step measured. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and indifferent. Yet somehow, I felt I belonged here now. Not fully, but enough to understand its rules, its rhythms, its dangers. I packed my few belongings and looked back at the tower, now bathed in the soft glow of dawn. I had survived the horrors of 8 nights, tested every rule, and emerged alive. I would never forget the forest, the creatures, or the nights that had brought me to the brink. The hidden 8th rule had been the key, and I had learned it well. Survival was not about strength or firepower. It was about trust, instinct, and surrender. As I walked into the morning light, I felt both relief and a lingering unease. The forest had spared me, but it had marked me, and somewhere in its shadows, the whispers continued. I was alive, but I knew that, in the forest, survival is never final.